Hello, welcome back to Contract Mastery. Today we're going to finish up the buyer-tenant representation agreement, and then we are going to dive into what I call the buyer agreement packet, or all of the documents that go along with the buyer-tenant representation agreement. My name is Michael Hughes. I am the broker owner of Abbey Property Solutions, which is the sister company to Abbey Realty. We are a full service real estate brokerage, just like Abbey Realty. The only difference, other than the size, of course, is that at Abbey Property Solutions, we offer property management services for residential and commercial clients, and we also offer property owner association management services. So if you have a client who is in need of management for their property, whether it's residential, commercial, or association, please keep us in mind and give us a call. We can help you, we can help your client. Okay, the buyer-tenant representation agreement. We're going to finish up with the amendment to the buyer-tenant rep agreement, which is TAR 1505, and the termination of the buyer-tenant rep agreement, TAR 1503. The amendment document is a pretty straightforward document. It's a one-page document like you see. Up at the top, it references your existing buyer-tenant representation agreement. It says, on or about blank, client and broker entered into a buyer-tenant representation agreement. This is going to be the first day of the term of your buyer-tenant representation agreement, the day that it went into effect, not necessarily the day that everybody signed it. Then the next line, effective whatever date, client and broker amend the agreement as follows. And then it gives you a couple of pre-written check boxes. The first one lets you redefine the market area of the buyer-tenant rep agreement. As you recall, the market area keeps coming up over and over and over again in the buyer-tenant rep agreement. So, for instance, if you start out saying your market area is the state of Texas, and your client comes to you and now wants to go look in Dallas or Austin or San Antonio or El Paso at the same time that they're working with you here in the Houston area, then you're going to want to redefine your market area so that they can go enter into buyer-tenant rep agreements with other agents in those market areas. B here will extend or change the date that the agreement terminates, which will be the last day in the term provision. So if you've been looking and you can't find the house for your buyer, you're coming up on the end of the buyer-tenant rep agreement, you can use this provision to extend that date. In C, I call this the timeout clause. Client instructs broker to cease providing services under the agreement on whatever date and to resume providing services on, check one of the boxes, receipt of further instructions, or to, and then you can write in whatever time period you are going to resume providing real estate services for your client. Note the next line. It says the agreement, the buyer-tenant rep agreement, is not terminated and it remains in effect for all other purposes. So the exclusivity provisions remain in effect. The definition of market area remains in effect. You're just taking a timeout with this provision. And then paragraph D is a fill in the blank. So you reference whatever paragraphs you are talking about, and then you fill in whatever changes you want. Be careful, of course, when you're filling in things freehand here. Stick to factual statements. Stick to information that is fill in the blank information in the buyer-tenant rep agreement. Don't go changing people's rights and obligations under the agreement without running it past your broker and probably an attorney in order to make sure you're doing it correctly. But for instance, if you renegotiated the commission rate, that would be something that would go in here because it's not referenced under any of the other provisions. After that, it's a basic signature line. Once again, the name of the broker goes on the top line, not the designated broker. The termination document is another one-page document. This one's a little more complex than the amendment, and it does have what I call a gotcha in here. So let's dive in. It again references the prior agreement on or about whatever date client and broker entered into a buyer-tenant rep agreement. Then you set the termination date. The parties terminate the agreement at 11:59 p.m. on whatever date. So bear in mind that whatever date you pick, the agreement is still in effect until the very end of the day at 11:59 p.m. Let's look at termination fees. If you are able to negotiate a termination fee, if you've put in a whole bunch of money marketing or looking around, I'm sorry, this is a buyer's agreement. So if you've negotiated a termination fee with your buyer, this is where you would put it in here at C1, just fill in the dollar amount. C2 and 3. These two paragraphs, if you put anything in here, will rewrite the buyer-tenant representation agreement paragraph about the protection period. If you recall, the protection period, you fill in whatever date in the buyer-tenant rep agreement, and it says that in order to invoke the protections of that paragraph, you have to send your buyer or tenant a written list of properties that you called to their attention while the buyer-tenant rep agreement was in effect. You have to send that list within 10 days of the expiration or the end of the buyer-tenant representation agreement. And then if the buyer purchases or leases any of those properties in the market area during that time, then you get paid whatever it says in the buyer-tenant rep agreement commission section. But here in the termination document, look at number 2. If on or before certain date, client agrees to purchase or lease a property by oral or written agreement or option, client will pay broker at the time the property is purchased or leased a fee equal to, and then you fill it in. You can, using this document, renegotiate the terms of the protection period that is in the buyer-tenant rep agreement. Look at 3. The fees specified in paragraph C2 are payable only if the client agrees to purchase or lease, check only one box, any property in the market area, or B, any of the following properties, and then you would list them. So potentially you can do away with the written list requirement, the requirement to have a written list, because at 3A, if you check any property in the market area, well, you don't have to send them a list because it's any property in the market area. Of course, you got to get your buyer to agree to this. And under C2, you can potentially renegotiate how much you're going to get paid if the buyer purchases any of the properties spelled out in paragraph 3. Now, the next paragraph, release, says, except for the promise made in this termination, and that is the promise to pay whatever you have just agreed to pay in paragraph C, except for the promise made in this termination, client and broker release each other from all obligations under or related to the agreement, including but not limited to the protection period clause, which will no longer apply. So if you put anything in C2 or C3, this termination document will supersede, it will override whatever you have put in the protection period clause of the buyer-tenant representation agreement. Be aware of that. And again, the signature block with the entity broker's name, not the individual designated broker. All right, well, that concludes the buyer-tenant representation agreement, including the amendment document and the termination document. So now I want to move on to what I call the buyer agreement packet, or the documents that go with the buyer-tenant representation agreement. And they've listed them out here for you. These are specifically referenced in the buyer-tenant rep agreement under the addenda paragraph with the check boxes, and they are not mandatory. But as we'll see as we go along through this, it is a very good idea to give your buyer or tenant these documents. But why? Why? It's a lot of paper. Well, let's talk about why. First reason, disclosure. By providing all of these documents, you are going to disclose necessary information about the agency relationship, the agent, buyer, or tenant relationship that you have just entered into. It also defines terms that are used throughout the transaction that we as real estate professionals are familiar with. We know the lingo, we know what all these terms mean, but buyers and tenants probably don't. So by providing these, you're essentially giving them information they need to know what these terms mean and what we're talking about when we're using them. These documents will identify particular issues that can cause problems in our transactions and that keep coming up over and over again. So we kind of give our buyers and tenants a heads up about certain problems. So we'll go over what they are. They clarify the client's responsibilities in the client-broker relationship, and you also disclose the limits of the broker's capabilities and responsibilities in that relationship. Now, the second big reason is liability avoidance, and it's a big reason. These documents are specifically written to cover your tail as the agent and also your broker's tail, which they're very appreciative of. All of these additional documents are disclosure documents. They put the client on notice about important responsibilities that the client has and important limitations on what you as the agent can do and what you're responsible for in that relationship. You can never disclose too much to your clients. If you disclose all this information and your buyer gets spooked and the transaction collapses, that is infinitely better than not disclosing, having the transaction blow up in your face, and then having an angry buyer coming to you and saying, "You should have told me." By providing all of these forms, the intention is to discourage or deter a disgruntled client from suing the brokerage in the first place. Because if they come to you and say, "You should have told me," and you're able to point to these documents and say, "But I did, let's look at these documents," you're in a far better position than if you do not give them those documents. Going to skip over this one because you can't hear the sound. One last word for now. All of these buyer packet documents, and indeed all TAR documents, go out of their way to tell the client that the broker is not an expert in anything other than being a real estate professional, and that the client has to do their own investigation. They have to hire their own inspectors. They have to hire their own contractors, etc. And then other documents make it clear that if we, as the real estate agent, give them a list of inspectors or contractors or lenders or whatever, that just by us giving them that list, we're not endorsing or guaranteeing the work of the people who are on the list. It's important that you don't sabotage those protections by then holding yourself out as an expert or making statements that a buyer would interpret as being an endorsement or a guarantee or a promise that this guy is the absolute best in town. So just be careful with what you say. If you have a background in construction and there's a lot of construction questions, if you are acting as the agent, you may want to bite your tongue and refer them to a contractor who can answer their questions in that capacity. Because if you hold yourself out as an expert, you could circumvent or sabotage all of the protections that these documents are trying to set up for you. So bear that in mind. Let's dive into the documents. First one, protecting your home from mold. This is TAR 2507. Poor strawberries. This document is actually published by the Texas Department of Health and the Texas Department of Insurance. The Texas Association of Realtors has just adopted it and slapped their own document number on it. And it is a 2-page document. This is very small font. It is a very dense document. There's a lot of stuff in here. But they break it down into these little boxes that kind of compartmentalize the information and make it a little easier to stomach. We are not going to be mold experts. That's not the purpose of this class, but you do need to understand what the document says so that if the client asks, hey, what's this? Then you can refer them back to it. Or if they come to you with a mold question, you can refer them to this document, which then has other sources of information that they can use to get additional information. So let's start real quick at the top of the page. Mold problems can adversely affect homeowners in Texas. Let's start with the basics. And then, this information will help protect your investment in your home, may prevent the possibility of health risks due to mold exposure. If you are a renter, contact your landlord when you have a maintenance need related to water damage. In the first block there, what are molds? Well, it goes into an explanation for the consumer as to, okay, what are molds? And we're not experts in it. Kind of explains what they are. And it points out that for molds to grow and reproduce, they need a food source, which is any organic material, leaves, wood, paper, dirt, moisture, and they also need water. So since molds grow by eating the organic material, gradually they will destroy whatever it is they are feeding on. If you've ever walked into a house that's been vacant for a long time, has a bad mold problem, and you can see that the stuff's just eating away the walls. Why are molds such a concern? Well, there's 2 big reasons. The first one being damage to the home. It points out most of the time mold spores found inside have come in from outside. So routine cleaning of your home and the furnishings can help keep these mold spore levels low. But extensive mold growth can damage your home and your belongings, such as carpets, sofas, cabinets, and in time, unchecked mold growth can cause damage to structural elements of your home. Second big reason is health effects. If you are a person like myself that has an adverse reaction to molds, you're familiar with this. Mold growing inside a home is an unsanitary condition that may present potential health risks. And then they go on to describe and list some of the possible adverse health effects. This is essentially a description of my day after a major rain, which is why I have lots of Claritin. The potential health effects depend on the amount and type of mold present, the length and frequency of the exposure, and the sensitivity and health condition of exposed individuals. Some people exposed to mold or mold spores can become sensitized and develop allergies to the mold or other health problems. So you want to minimize your exposure as much as possible. And then kind of goes without saying, but they have to put it in here anyway. Anyone with a health problem that they believe may be due to mold exposure should consult a medical professional, their doctor. So the next box, obviously we cannot eliminate all the food sources for mold since it's any organic material, wood, leaves, cotton, anything organic. So the big focus in this document is controlling water and moisture levels, and here, what to do if a leak occurs. And for those of us that live in this area, of course, this is pretty much flooding 101, but you want to immediately stop the source of the leak or the flooding, remove excess water, pull up wet carpet, increase air circulation by running fans, opening windows, if necessary, removing wallboard and flooring materials. Don't throw away removed or damaged materials until instructed by your insurance company, and keep all your receipts, photos, and other relevant documents. For those of us that have dealt with this is pretty common sense stuff, but first-time home buyers that have never had to deal with anything like this is information that they need to know. And then down below there, of course, are the other sources of information that our clients can utilize. There's also tons of information available through Google on the internet. On the second page, the key to controlling mold in a house is controlling the moisture. So the first thing they say is you want to maintain humidity levels below 60% inside the home, and they give them a list of ways they can do that. Vent the bathrooms, don't block your air conditioning vents, keep your air conditioner going, use dehumidifiers, increase the ventilation, use exhaust fans when you're cooking, washing dishes, cleaning, all the stuff that generates steam and a lot of moisture. Avoid setting the thermostat to auto. Set the thermostat to auto. Don't leave it on. Some people leave it, if you just leave it on and circulate the air, that somehow helps with your cooling bills. But what you're doing is you can be circulating damp air whenever the compressor is not running. So they say don't do that. Add insulation to reduce potential for condensation on cold surfaces. Other precautions to take. And here you're going to get into a lot of things that you're going to see in inspection reports. This and the next couple of slides. You see this over and over again on your inspection reports. And this is one way to explain to them why they'll see all of this stuff, because a lot of it has to do with mold prevention and mold control. So make sure everyone knows where the water valve in the house. Many people don't. Is it on the inside? Is it on the outside? It's usually not the meter shutoff valve where you got to get the little tool, get into the manhole. There's almost always a valve that shuts off the main water supply into the house. It's either on the outside of the house, sometimes it's on the inside of the house. Everybody needs to know where it is. Keep your rain gutters and downspouts clean. Insulate the pipes and the outside faucets. Don't block the weep holes, which are the little gaps on the ground floor. When you have a brick house, you see little gaps where they've essentially just not put mortar between the bricks. Those are important. That helps air circulate in and out of the house. You don't want to block them. You don't want to cover them up with dirt for that reason, and also because termites can get into your house if you pile dirt up on those. More things down below about prevention. Don't carpet your bathrooms. And then more things about inspection. And again, ton of this you're going to see on inspection reports over and over again. Stuff about hot water heaters, AC drain lines, appliance hoses, having to do with garbage disposal, dishwashers, ice makers, all the things that move water around. You want to make sure the hoses are in good shape. Showers, tubs, sinks, and toilets. This is where a lot of mold forms because they're always wet. So a lot of good information. Don't want to go over it all. But that is the mold prevention, protect your home from mold document. It's a good idea to read through it. Again, because if your clients ask, you need to be able to explain it. And also it ties into so much that they're going to see in an inspection report. Next document, information about property insurance for a buyer or seller. Use this document for your buyers and for your listings. And the first thing it comes out and tells them the availability and affordability of property insurance can affect both the buyer and the seller. It's important to both sides of the transaction. Failure to obtain property insurance at or before the closing can delay the transaction. It can bust the transaction, either of which can impose an inconvenience and a cost, both to the buyer and the seller. There are a number of factors that affect the availability and the affordability of insurance. And it talks about some of the different levels of insurance coverage and why the buyers need to shop around and know what they're getting. Some policies may cover replacement cost of the improvements and the replacement cost of personal items. Other policies may cover only the value of the improvements, may exclude lots of casualties or events that might cause an insurance claim. And then some policies are a mix of the two, somewhere in between. Paragraph 2 here explains to the buyer or seller Coverage level and prices vary from company to company. They really need to shop around because one insurance company may refuse to insure a particular person or a particular property, while another company won't have a problem and they'll write the policy. One insurance company may charge a significantly lower premium than another insurance company based on whatever algorithms and processes they use to determine what their premiums are. You will find wildly different premium amounts for the same coverage. It's important to shop around. Here are some examples of criteria that an insurance company can use in evaluating an insurance application. Past claims filed against the property in the last 5 years, past claims filed by that applicant in the last 5 years, regardless of what property it was, the applicant's insurance credit score, past relationships between the insurance company and that applicant, and the physical characteristics of the property, age, location, construction materials, whether it's in a flood zone, things like that. One thing that's not referenced in here but almost always contributes is not only the insurance credit score, but their actual credit score. Insurance companies will pull that as well. There is a database called the Comprehensive Loss Underwriting Exchange, or the CLUE database. And this is essentially an insurance credit report. It is run by Equifax, which is a credit reporting company, and an insurance company will obtain a CLUE report on the property and on the individual when they are evaluating an application for insurance. The report contains information about the claims history of the property and of the applicant. Talks a little bit more about it. Different insurance companies use the CLUE report in different ways, and I guess that's part of the reason why the prices are so varied. While the CLUE reports are generally accurate, there may be errors in the report. And it gives an example. An event may be listed as a claim, even though the insurance company didn't pay any proceeds out. So if a homeowner listed a claim, but the amount did not meet the deductible and the homeowner paid the entire amount, but it's still listed as a claim. And it talks about how a homeowner can, or an applicant can go about challenging inaccurate information. A property owner may, for a fee, obtain the CLUE report on his or her property. And there are different ways you can do it. Paragraph D here. This is the admonishment to the buyer. Promptly after entering into a contract to buy a property in Texas, the buyer should take the following steps to avoid delays in closing and to avoid additional costs. And it spells it out for them. If the buyer has the option to terminate the contract, the buyer should make sure that the buyer and the insurance agent have completed these steps before the option period expires. Always explain to a buyer that the two big things they need to do during the option period: schedule the inspection, talk to the insurance agent. Of course, they're also going to be working with the lender and providing documentation and all of those things. But we need to get that inspection done, of course, during the option period. But one of the things that sometimes gets missed is they need to talk to an insurance agent and find out what the premium is going to be, because the insurance premium affects the monthly mortgage payment, right? Principal, interest, insurance escrow, tax escrow. So the insurance escrow is a big piece to determining what the monthly payment is going to be. So here are the steps. Contact one or more insurance agents. Discuss the various levels of coverage. Ask questions so that the buyer understands what the levels of coverage are. The insurance agent can provide written summaries of various coverage levels. Submit an application for insurance with the agent of the buyer's choice, and I would suggest multiple applications. If they're working with an agent that submits, is an independent insurance broker and works with several different insurance companies, great. They'll get you several different quotes. But if you are dealing with an insurance agent that is a captive agent that only works for one insurance carrier, then they need to be contacting several agents to get different quotes. Applying for insurance promptly helps avoid surprises or delays, allows the buyer to evaluate various coverage levels and prices. Delaying the application for insurance may limit opportunities to obtain the most suitable coverage and may limit opportunities to address any unforeseen problems or delays in obtaining coverage. In recent years, many transactions have been delayed or terminated because of problems associated with obtaining insurance. I will give you an example. Back when I used to live down in Galveston County and I was selling real estate in Galveston County, I had a buyer. We entered into a contract to purchase a home in Galveston on the island. The home was a cinder block single story, and so it was on ground level. And of course, it was in a flood zone. It's on the island. The buyers did not contact an insurance agent, as I had advised them to do during the option period. And when they finally got around to looking at insurance coverage, of course, they're in a flood zone. Flood insurance is required, but it was on the ground floor, and the amount of the flood insurance was going to triple their monthly payment, which they could not afford. But we were outside of the option period. The transaction busted, and they lost their earnest money, and they were not happy. But I had provided this document for them, and the flood insurance document, which we'll talk about next time. And always advise your buyers, get this information as quickly as you can. Ask for written confirmation from the insurance agent that the insurance company has received the application, has received the clue report, and has conducted all necessary reviews to issue the policy at the price quoted. It is the buyer's responsibility to keep up with the insurance agent and making sure they're doing their job. And number 4, also very important, verify that the insurance coverage that the buyer chooses is acceptable to the buyer's lender, because all of this work is going to be for naught if they get this wonderful policy and the lender says, no, that's not good enough. We need a different policy. Then paragraph E here, if one is not able to obtain insurance at reasonable price or if more information is needed, they can contact the Texas Department of Insurance. All right. This is a good stopping point. Next time we're going to go into the general information for, I forget the name of the document now, but the general information document, which is a 5-page glossary, if you will, of different terms. We're going to go into the information about special flood hazards, and we're going to review the document that says, for your protection, get a home inspection. So please join us for the next time. I'm Michael Hughes with Abbey Property Solutions. This has been Contract Mastery. Thanks for tuning in.